Okay, Wellspring, we're back in action. If everybody could grab their seats. We're going to do the raffle now. No, just kidding. We don't have a raffle. Next year we might do a raffle. All right. Thanks for filtering back in. Deals are being done. Products are being marketed. Regulations are being reduced as we speak. This is a distinct pleasure for me to introduce our morning keynote. Sally Gutierrez has been with us through the full program yesterday and today, very active in the kind of breakout sessions of the conversations we've had. We had a chance to have a meal together last night, hosted by David Giuliani, which was great, along with some other folks, and a real leader nationally in clean water technology and innovation. It is going to be a real treat to hear from Sally and her perspective. What I found in my brief conversations with her is that she operates at a high policy level, but also at a very practical, down-to-earth level as well. I think she has roots in Houston, another Houstonian in the crowd, so we appreciate that, and I'm sure she'll fill you in some more on what she's been doing since leaving Houston. She's the Chief of the Environmental Innovation Technology Cluster Development and Support Program at the federal EPA. She was appointed in 2012, and this effort she's working on right now seeks to advance environmental protection in tandem with economic development through the formation of public-private partnerships utilizing the Technology Innovation Clusters model. This is how economic developers talk all the time. These are the words we use, so it's a beautiful thing for us when someone from EPA is talking our language. We get it from the Department of Commerce a lot, but to hear it from the from the Environmental Protection Agency is really a pleasure. With that, let me ask Sally to come forward, and let's all give her a nice Tacoma Pierce County greeting.
Thank you, Bruce. And the real secret behind the podium, there's a little platform here that is a tribute to apparently one of your senators that also was a little vertically challenged. So anyway, it's very nice to be able to see you over the podium. So thanks. And I want to thank Bruce and Connie and David and Eagles and Kurt and so many others for allowing me to be here today. It's a real honor to be in this part of the country, just one of those places that is a dream and a treasure for the country. So to me, it's been just a terrific visit. I want to particularly thank Eagles, who represents you on our national network of cluster leaders, and he's a great advocate and a great person to represent your efforts here in Tacoma. So he's been a terrific collaborator, and you're so fortunate to have the leadership here because it makes all the difference. But in any event, I'm just happy to be here to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do and kind of the opportunity that's before us. And again, with so many challenges, we can think about them in terms of problems, or we can think about them as opportunities to improve our communities, to grow jobs, to really, really promote a brighter future as we live and become what I would term more sustainable communities going forward. And that's really my platform in so many different ways. I wanted to just mention very briefly how I got into this game, because it is, like Bruce mentioned, it's a little un-EPA-like to be talking about, solving water problems and creating economic opportunity at the same time. But I was going on a trip, and they have those magazines in the little pockets of airplanes, and I read an article about a technology cluster that was formed around visualization in Orlando, Florida. And the article had such an impact on me. It really talked about how you bring federally sponsored research, and coming from a federal research laboratory, that immediately caught my attention. But it also talked about the alignment of so many other different parts to form an ecosystem of innovation. And to me, it was at that moment that I said, well, if this can be done for visualization, surely we can do that in an industry category like water technologies. And that's how that was about 5 years ago when that happened. And to see where, all of this started, at least in my mind, and where things are right now, it's just amazing to think about it in an industry that we would all say is very conservative, slow to move, and the like. So I wanted to just share with you kind of where we are right now. And of course, EPA is not alone in this pursuit of trying to promote the development and the health and well-being of clusters and cluster organizations. We have excellent partners starting all the way up from the president through to the Economic Development Administration, the U.S. Small Business Administration, the U.S. Department of Commerce, and so many other parts of the government. And one of the things that I can say also that's perhaps a little bit different than where we were back years ago is that the amount of cooperation among the agencies at the federal level it's just the best it's ever been. And I guess when we started the effort in Cincinnati, it was the first time that EPA had really partnered very closely with the U.S. Small Business Administration. And there has just been such an epiphany and so much change that has come from those relationships. And we all have to wonder, why didn't we do this before? But nevertheless, here we go. So I don't have to explain too much about clusters, other than to this group especially, because you all know that it is about building an innovation ecosystem of connected and very, very deeply embedded networks of everything from inventors and idea folks with end users. Stewardship organizations for water clusters are extremely important and perhaps a little bit different than in some other industrial sectors. Startups, programs that support these kinds of initiatives at the local, state, and certainly the federal level investment. So you're aligning all of these different pieces together, and there has to be a group of leaders. I think that's very, very important that someone, and you've got them here, Connie's sitting right there. You've got to have someone who really serves as the force to really bring what might be otherwise effective but disparate programs together. And it's that alignment and that continued push forward around supporting the growth of an industry. That's where the magic is. And I can tell you from my experience now working with a number of groups throughout the U.S. and also experiences in other countries, that this stuff really works, and we can begin to see outcomes. The U.S. Small Business Administration, in their efforts to fund cluster initiatives, have done surveys of outcomes of these cluster initiatives. And I just wanted to read you a little bit about their evaluation report. This is the third year that they just released in July. And they say that more than a third of small businesses and half of large organizations reported that cluster participation increased their integration into industry supply chains. A majority of both small businesses and larger organizations reported establishing one or more alliances with other cluster members, and more than 70% reported that cluster activities led to increases in collaborative activity within their regions. Nearly 40% of small businesses reported that cluster services had some influence on their access to capital, and nearly $4 billion in new economic activity accrued to affiliated small businesses during 2013. It goes on, but it kind of gives you an indication that these initiatives can be very, very successful and very important in the growth of regions and the prosperity of regions. So this is just surveys that Small Business Administration has done. There are actually global surveys that are done on business clusters as well, and we track that also. I don't have time to talk about those efforts, but there's a green book that's available. Also, it just reinforces some of these same principles. We think about the cluster cycle. Sometimes this is one way you can think of it. You know, it has a place certainly for research institutions, ideation from all sectors. There's a commercialization aspect. Certainly in this field, testing becomes a very, very important part of that cycle. Adoption and purchase and investment and workforce development and advocacy and stewardship, again, in this field especially, is critical. I do think that workforce development is something that is sometimes not given enough attention or play in some of the talks that I hear on the topic. But you know, in order to support the ecosystem, have to build the workforce and continually, you know, churn out those graduates that can then be the employees in these companies. Certainly, the opportunity is there. This is size of the global market, and the U.S. market is $100 billion. So. Not a trivial type opportunity, but characterized in terms of slow to adopt, long adoption cycles. So, you know, some of the examples in the business would say that there might be as long as a 20-year adoption cycle. And in fact, one of the examples of, you know, because everybody asks, can you make money in this field? And certainly there is a classic example of xenon water technologies. They're a membrane bioreactor type of company that emerged from Ontario, Canada. And the principal there was Dr. Andrew Benedict. The xenon exited through an acquisition by the General Electric Company and made some people like Dr. Benedict quite rich. And I'll talk a little bit more about XPV Capital, but it really sparked the opportunity to build XPV Capital from that acquisition. You know, when you think about the business case, you know, certainly we've gone over this, so I'm not going to spend time through this, but just to say that business in every way knows and understands the importance of paying attention to what the water situation is in the places where these facilities are located. And of course, we're talking about a lot of the multinationals who have facilities that could be in places that are challenged through flooding or droughts or things like that, scarcity. And there are many examples of these kinds of threats. And big business really understands this and is taking active steps to position themselves and do things to be better stewards for the long-term survival and thriving of their businesses. So I think that's just an important point to continue to make. I wanted to just talk for a moment about what has changed in the last 4 years and why I think there is perhaps more knowledge and more players in here that can help as this initiative and other initiatives move forward. You have the Clean Tech Group. They're out of San Francisco, and they track investments in water technologies, and they have a platform called I3, and it allows early-stage companies to go into their inventories and to be viewed for potential investment. They're also working with companies on challenges. For example, they've got one that's active right now with Nowco and Ecolab. So they're there to help, to really try to connect early stage or later stage companies to the investment community. The Water Environment Federation and the Water Environment Research Foundation have really led the way in really getting the municipal end user community organized around innovation. So really, really reinforcing how important it is for water utilities to articulate their challenges and to begin to source innovation. So this LIFT effort that's being led by WRF and WEF, it is a year old right now, and they have already secured participation by more than 230 water utilities across the country. It's a profound effort that is really making a lot of headway in readying those end users for adoption of the products, the new innovative products. Blue Tech Research is another group out of Ireland that is very much involved in tracking innovation across the globe in water. Paul O'Callaghan is the CEO there, and they also have an information platform that is available, and through a subscription type model you can have access to that. But again, it's intelligence, and it is a service that just wasn't there before. A new player on the scene is Isle Utilities. They're a standalone enterprise that is a spin out from Thames Water, and they are actually assembling water utilities in regions, in various regions, and talking to them about what kinds of problems they have and what technologies they would like to see. And they're trying to marry the technology providers, and many of those are companies at early stage, with this end user municipal community. So they weren't doing that, and they just established an office in the U.S. in the past 2 years, and now they've expanded their staff, and they're beginning to work with a number of these end users of these technologies across the country. Bookie Oren is another name that is very familiar in the business, and Bookie Oren was past CEO of Mekarot, which is the water utility in Israel. And during the time that Bookie was CEO, he established a utility-based innovation program within that water utility, and now he's teaching other utilities across the country and the world how to do that. And again, it's services that were not on the on the screen, so to speak, before. So it makes it even more of an opportunity now, perhaps, than we've ever had with the inclusion and the assembly of these players. There's also very much, money that's in play, and XPV Capital is a very interesting group in that they are a pure play investment, later stage investment type of group. They're based out of Toronto, Canada. And it's interesting because, remember, I talked about Xenon, and really the money, some of the money that went in to establish XPV Capital came from the folks who benefited from the acquisition of GE, of the Xenon technology by GE. But you can see there some of the technologies that they are invested in, Sail Ventures, Meilinger Partners, a number of others that are kind of sticking their toe into the water, so to speak, and want to invest. So there are investment groups that are becoming extremely savvy with this sector, and they are leverage points for these innovative products as they move forward and as the companies grow. One of the messages also is that a little known part of the federal government is that the federal government is also an investor in early stage water technology development. And we, as part of this effort on the clusters, we felt like it was very important for us to know across the SBIR program, Small Business Innovation Research Awards, across the agencies, how many were going to water? What's the amount of money? How many awards? Where are these awards across the country? And we are now able to map this investment. But I think the opportunity here is you can see that about $90 million over 5 years has gone in to support new technology development on the part of the federal government. And that money can go to Tacoma businesses, or it can go to businesses in our great state of Massachusetts. But the money is up for grabs. So there's great opportunity here, even at a time when perhaps our research budgets are not as robust. We still peel off about 2% of our R&D extramural budgets to go to seed these technology companies. When we look at some of the ones that are here in this region, these are the ones that are within that inventory. And, I think the opportunity here is how can you really get more of a share? So that would be maybe a challenge and an opportunity. And I know that one of the best practices, I would say, for clusters that are involved in water technologies is to see if you can really aspire to grow your number of SBIR water awards through time. Again, that money's out there. It's going to go to someone. Might as well be you. This is a concept that I have to give a lot of credit to my colleague Maggie Thoreau, who works with me as my second in command, so to speak, of the program. She has done a lot of work in this area of how do we translate water problems into economic opportunity, and how do you actually articulate that? And she has been working very, very much, very strongly in the area of innovative stormwater, on-site sewage disposal systems, not stormwater, on-site sewage disposal systems, because there are some very serious nutrient pollution problems in the New England estuaries. Many systems are not working properly, can't work given the conditions there. And communities are asking for options. So we now know what the targets are, and we can say that we know what the price point is appropriate here, and we can also, in many ways, characterize the market opportunity. interestingly enough, for this particular class of technology, the policy part of it is not a trivial one. And actually, I think we need to work on that, and we are working very actively with the folks in the Office of Water, states, a number of industry organizations on how we can reduce the amount of testing and pilot testing and repeat testing that's going on there. So that's a national effort that is underway to reduce the barriers and will allow us to really capitalize on this important market to address ultimately a serious nutrient pollution problem that we have. So you can see kind of what EPA's bent is on this. We need solutions to these environmental problems, and they have to be driven through the private sector. For all the good research we do, there's got to be vendors and products out there, and we just don't do that. I wanted to give an example from the work in Cincinnati that is maybe illustrative of how cluster activity works. And in this case, we have a company, and they're called CityLogix. And they're what I would characterize as a smart water type of platform, in that they are trying to work with water utilities to better determine where water loss is going on. So it's not uncharacteristic for there to be 20-25% water loss in water distribution systems. And it's important for water utilities to know and be able to analytically know where to invest that money, and some of that was talked about yesterday in terms of asset management. When we track back, CityLogix and the evolution of CityLogix, again, it's about building this network. And so in the case of CityLogix, when we go back and say, how did that company get started? Where did all of that come into play? And we go back and we looked at research that we funded in our Homeland Security, Water Security Division. And really that's where the investment was made to develop this software. At the same time that we were investing with that, we had a participant from that research from the University of Cincinnati. So we had a member of the faculty at the University of Cincinnati. And it was through the leadership of Dr. Jim Huber that he really saw that there was more to it than just simply another presentation or another group of publications, but that there was perhaps actual value to the marketplace. And he partnered up with colleagues that were in the business world and created CityLogix. In the northern Kentucky area, there is an incubator, a business incubator, that focuses on informatics. So all of their technology companies that they accept into their programs are around information. So CityLogix was accepted into Uptech. Uptech investors now own about 9% of CityLogix. There was a need to demonstrate that technology, and since the Northern Kentucky Water District participates actively in the cluster, they were the test bed for that technology initially. The CityLogix was successful in securing an NSF Phase 1 SBIR grant, and interestingly enough, the state of Kentucky has a matching grant program. And so by winning the SBIR grant, they were able to apply to the state of Kentucky to double the amount. So they matched dollar for dollar the SBIR awards. That's a very interesting program that the state of Kentucky has. And our partners from the Department of Commerce certainly are there to help us when the company grows to the point where they are able to export the technology. So they participate very actively in the cluster as well. And the story goes on, but this is illustrative of what we can tell now in this cluster environment that we really couldn't really realize before. So it's a powerful example, I think, of bringing a number of pieces of information together to tell an important story about how these companies emerge. Another example of what cluster organizations and initiatives can do is to really help to reduce the barriers to market. And in this case, Confluence, which is the name of the group there in the Cincinnati region, they worked with their state DEP directors to negotiate a memorandum of cooperation around technology adoption practices. We are supporting a research project that will sort out, kind of an example project about how that would work. And we are using UV disinfection technologies for small systems as the test case. But really, it is a test of can we bring these three individual and independent regulatory and authorizing agencies for this technology together to tell us what their data requirements are, and if we can get them to really accept one another's data, if we can give them the right data in a way that will help their decision making, we hope that it will be an example of how we can open up that tri-state market. So that's another example, very illustrative of cluster behavior and what changed, and again, before we got to this point, these sorts of things were not happening. This is another great indicator of what happens in this cluster and innovation mindset. So for the first time, the Metropolitan Sewer District in Cincinnati has established a website to actually call for technologies and is actively scouting for technologies to help them reduce the cost and improve the effectiveness of the compliance of their combined sewer overflow problem. The estimated burden for compliance with the consent decree, because it is a combined sewer system, is over $1 billion to the community around Cincinnati, and that's just Cincinnati. There's another one in northern Kentucky. So the burden is quite high. So the directors have really taken on this push to source innovation and to begin to think about where could solutions come from. But this is very different behavior, very unique, and I think driven in large part because of this innovation mindset. There are communities that are emerging throughout the country that are also pursuing this, and for EPA, it's just an honor to work with each one of these groups, and the panel is representative and can tell you their stories, but more and more communities are coming forward to really try to grow their water industry. And one of the questions that I get asked from time to time is, are we full? Are there enough of these cluster efforts? And as you could see by the size of the market, there's a lot of room at the table. And one of the national perspectives on this is not every one of the technology clusters works in the same space. For example, Fresno, California, which is very important to you because of the almonds, going into your business here. So they're pursuing more efficient water use in the Central Valley, and they are also working on water reuse for food processing. So their space is different from, say, the space in Cincinnati or in Milwaukee that are more dealing with older infrastructure and water loss. So there will be some level of specialization going forward, and I'm happy that Tacoma is taking on stormwater, very important issue. So to me, is there more room at the table? Sure there is. And to look at this from a national perspective, it's amazing. Most of the efforts are about 12, they start about 12 years ago, so Fresno is the most mature of all of them, having started about 12 years ago, Milwaukee about 8 years ago, and all the rest of them are newer. So we are very much kind of in a place where we are all just starting down this road. And I think there's a real benefit of working together. And I wanted to just make this, I asked my student to kind of put together this slide for me about why do I think that cooperation is very, very important in this field. It's a tough industry, for one, and the more like-minded communities and players there is, I think, we can make more progress together, perhaps more so than individually. It is a model of competition, so cooperation and competition. So we need to cooperate where it makes sense and not where it doesn't. I know that one of the areas that we really need to cooperate on is in the area of technology testing, but there are many other places where we can say we need to work together, because if anyone figures it out in their market, that market may not be realized in other parts of the country. So we want to really encourage this cooperation, and I've spent a lot of time trying to work with the groups across the country to bring about kind of a cooperation type environment, and I think that's very, very powerful. Each one of the clusters, just like you have here, where you have very unique, very robust knowledge in the area of stormwater management, so other clusters have very robust and very, very unique testing facilities, intellectual capacity, and the like. And I want to give an example. I'm almost done here, but I want to give an example of perhaps how we can operate in the future. So the group in Cincinnati received a request from a company or a person in Singapore that was looking for a very, very specific component for a technology. So they're actually coming here to try and source that particular component. Confluence, the Cincinnati cluster, canvassed their manufacturing community and determined that they didn't have a manufacturer of that component there. See, if we had a network by which they could say, I don't have it here, but you know what, Tacoma has it, or Massachusetts has it, that's a way that we can say that's good for the overall system, and you would do likewise when a request comes in that doesn't quite fit the rubric here. And so to me, those are some of the benefits of having a national network. It would be the face for us as a country on what we have going on in terms of water technology innovation. On a global basis, these are the folks that I personally pay a lot of attention to. Ontario has a water cluster. They're called WaterTap. They were formed about 4 years ago. The province of Ontario passed a Water Opportunities Act, so actually legislation to create their cluster there. And they are a force to be reckoned with. They're very, very good. And Israel, of course, parlayed what's a very, very water-scarce environment into really technology leaders in so many areas, such as membranes and desalination. So again, they had a problem that was a national security issue focused around water, and they parlayed that into really global leadership in water technology. And Singapore is very, very likely situated because of their water situation there. So these are clusters across the world that we need to cooperate with and learn from and bring best practices to. And so it's wonderful to be working with each one of these groups as well. And they're eager to cooperate with the clusters and the agency here in the United States because, again, they want entry of their products into our marketplace as well. Some companies have been transferred, for example, from Israel to the United States. It's another way to grow jobs. So there's that sort of thing going on as well. But make no beans about it. They're also shopping for your wonderful companies. So I gotta keep that in mind as well. So these are some of the things that we do in the program. We certainly try to advise on best practices. We now have a website. We want to really connect what EPA does to the clusters. We want to maintain this inventory of clusters and to be real advocates for the work that's going on here and in the other places across the country. We want to continue to assemble this information on SBIR awards, and especially using that perhaps as a metric in progress on the part of the clusters. And we want to continue to convene the cluster leaders to work on these issues that are common and important for all of the country moving forward. So that's it. All right, thank you very much for your attention. All right. Oh, certainly.
I'm going to move some furniture. Sally's part of the panel that's coming up next. So questions for her, please have them at the ready, because that panel is going to have plenty of time to take them. What I'm going to do is introduce the moderator of the panel, and then he will take us through the introduction of the various panel members and how the panel is going to run. The introduction's really just been made. Thank you, Sally, for that. The national picture of and international, but the national picture here today of the water cluster network that's emerging in the United States and our place in it. We're a newbie relative to some of the others, and that's an exciting position to be in. I think we've really shown we have legs in this industry, but we've got friends who are visiting with us to talk about some of the challenges and successes they've had. And so Eagles Milbergs will be the moderator of this panel. Eagles is someone who is globally recognized as a leader and strategist in innovation, not just in the water space, but across many industries. He's currently the president of the Center for Accelerating Innovation here in the Puget Sound area, which is an independent economic development organization building innovation ecosystems, accelerating entrepreneurship, and promoting sustainable economic growth and job creation. I worked with Eagles for a number of years while he was the executive director of the Washington State Economic Development Commission, and I used to refer to Eagles in an affectionate way and in a complimentary way as a good virus in Olympia. He was one of the few people, and I was one of those people as well, but I wasn't there every day the way he was, trying to infect the legislature and the governor's office, not this legislature, not this governor, but the governor's office and the legislature with the concept of innovation, the concept of economic development being at the forefront of legislative policy making and implementation. And it's not to say everyone was in the dark, but I would say a lot of people were in the dark when we started that. Connie Bacon also served on that commission and was a voice of innovation and reason there as well. So Eagles Milbergs is a good virus, and now he's a good virus who's going to be moderating this outstanding panel. So with that, please welcome Eagles Milbergs.
There we go. Well, thanks very much, Bruce. I just got off a plane from West Africa, so I don't know if people are concerned. Well, I want to thank Tacoma, first of all, and a shout out to my friends here in Tacoma. 6 years ago, when I got the invitation from the governor to ask if I wanted to be the executive director of the Economic Development Commission, I ended up meeting this incredible team from Tacoma. I remember meeting with Melanie Dressel and Columbia Bank. She's the president there and CEO. And Connie, Port of Tacoma, Bruce, et cetera. And I kind of realized that the initial leadership of this Economic Development Commission was going to be in Tacoma. And so Bruce ended up serving after Melanie as chairman of the Economic Development Commission, and helped publish our first long-term strategy, an innovation-based economic development strategy for the state, which is still available, which is really, I think, a seminal piece of work. Our website is still up, although, you know, the commission is no longer there, but the commission lives on in a digital framework. So to some degree, it's still educating folks, not only here in Washington, but across the world, on what we're trying to do here. So thank you very much, and you're a big part of the reason I came out this way from Washington, D.C., a place, I have a favorite phrase about it, a place that you meet a lot of people going down Lover's Lane holding their own hand. So anyway, I don't know if you got that joke, but anyway, so we're going to have a very interesting discussion here, and Sally, you've done a great job in establishing the framework here, what a cluster is. In our state, and the Commission promoted the creation of 18 innovation partnership zones, one of which is here, the Clean Water Urban IPZ. And out of the 18 clusters, about 8 or 9 of them are focused on sustainability, environment, smart grid, energy efficiency, biofuels, et cetera, all about the future, growing new kinds of industry clusters. And I think the interesting thing that's happening now is people are looking at water as a critical component of economic development. Not just the fact that you need to provide water, you know, for industry or for the population, but the fact that if you start innovating in this field, you have an opportunity to do some exciting research and development, exciting manufacturing of new products, the creation of new services, and also addressing international markets, which is, over the next 20 years, well over $1 trillion is going to have to be invested in water-related kinds of infrastructure and activity. So we're not just looking at water as water treatment, we're starting to see it as a real economic development opportunity, and it's the reason I'm involved. So this panel, which, by the way, should be coming up here, good heavens, yeah, Glenn and Michael, and there we go, Joel, come on up here, populate the group, the panel here. We're going to take a national tour. Sally put up that nice map, you know, where all the clusters are. Well, we're going to have 5 of them on this panel. So, you know, almost half of the clusters that were on that map are sitting right here at this panel. A very unique coming together of important insights about what these clusters are. So we're going to be, tour is going to start as far away from here, New England. I think that was number 13 on Sally's map. We're going to go from New England to the southwest. So we're going to hit into Arizona. I think that was number 5. And then we're going to move up here to the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, number 2. I like the fact, I think you're being very political, Sally. You put Tacoma as number 1, so thank you very much. And then we're going to go back to the Midwest, where Sally will make maybe some more observations about confluence and kind of provide the Midwest sensibility when it comes to making these clusters work. I'm fond of various poets. T.S. Eliot, I read once in a while. He did a poem called The Hollow Men, and there's one phrase in there that has always caught my eye. It said, "Between the idea and the reality falls the shadow." And these are folks that are taking new water ideas and trying to transform those ideas, you know, to the market and bring value to customers, value to their communities, create economic development opportunities. So this is all about illuminating the shadow, of trying to understand what's going on there. So I've asked each of the panelists to take 5 minutes, PowerPoint free, so you can totally concentrate on what each of them is saying. And I've asked them to talk a little bit about their cluster, how it was formed, what the success factors might have been, how the clusters are governed, how are they financed, what are the expectations, what kinds of technologies. They're not going to answer all those questions. They were prompting questions, so I've given each one of them an opportunity to explain some key points about what their cluster is doing. So we want to start with New England, and let me introduce Michael Murphy, sitting right here. He's the Director of Water Innovation of the Massachusetts Clean Energy. He's the Senior Business Development Manager for Water Innovation in Boston, and he's responsible for developing the vision and strategy for the Water Innovation Program. And so he's been playing a key leadership role, and the cluster that he's helped develop and frame and providing guidance to is now called the New England Water Innovation Network. And he's had a lot of experience with NGOs, international NGOs, World Bank, and has done work in other interesting places around the world, Woodrow Wilson Center, Pacific Institute, Peace Corps, and the Business Council for Sustainable Development. So Michael, why don't you illuminate us on New England?
Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? First of all, I just want to start by offering my thanks and gratitude to the organizers and the sponsors. This has been a wonderful opportunity for me to come back out to Washington. I lived here 15 years ago in the Seattle area and really did enjoy it. Eagles just mentioned Peace Corps. Peace Corps took me down to South America out of Washington, so I'm really happy to be back. I also wanted to thank Sally just for her leadership. I got to know her a few years ago, and she's been very passionate and a strong leader in water cluster development. So the New England Water Innovation Network, this is the water cluster for New England, really got going a few years ago. 2011 was a catalytic year, and within that year there was a catalytic moment. In Sally's presentation, you saw Bookie Oren there at the bottom of the slide. Bookie Oren recognized Massachusetts as a thriving place for water industry. And on a trade mission to Israel, Governor Patrick and Bookie and a bunch of others were discussing, and it became very apparent very quickly that Massachusetts had a thriving water technology industry, yet it was unorganized. And so Governor Patrick came back to Massachusetts and said, look, we have a spirit of innovation. We have a lot that we've already done. We have an amazing portfolio of resources in which to draw upon. Let's do it with water technology. So that challenge was put forth. He began setting in motion the infrastructure on the public side to do this, yet this was to be a private sector endeavor. We were going to help. I should say just a little bit about the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. The Water Innovation Program is new. It's the newest program, probably a year and a half old, but we were identified as the agency to take the lead on helping to convene this. So that was my job. Fast forward a little bit, the New England Water Innovation Network has been set up as of this year. It's about 9 months old now, and they're really doing a lot of efforts around fundraising and gaining membership and thinking about what their value proposition is going to be. I now sit on the advisory board. I don't chair the steering committees anymore. Now that they're set up, I sit on the advisory board. And so it's been an exciting process, really fun to see happen. As far as how is this group really going to take shape and scale up, I think a couple things are quite important, and we're seeing those at play in Massachusetts. Really need to make sure that the benefits and the value proposition to all of the potential members and the industry at large see those benefits. That has to be clearly stated, and that's something that the New England Water Innovation Network is tightening up and beginning to do really well with. Also, multi-stakeholder engagement. I think we've been really blessed in New England and having people from the private sector, small companies, multinationals, early stage, really interesting early stage companies. And then the public sector, the investments community, the academic sector has been very strongly involved. So we have a really wide group, a diverse group of individuals involved in this effort. Another thing that will help us scale up is really a testing network. Sally mentioned it. This is one thing we're really looking at doing in the coming years. So right now we're looking at funding mechanisms to begin building out an infrastructure where we can test technologies for our young companies and other companies that might be interested. Now, we don't want to duplicate efforts. We know there's other demonstration sites around and other networks around, but we will focus on the challenges that Massachusetts has. So right now the New England Water Innovation Network is not focused on any one technology. At the moment, it's fairly agnostic. However, I mentioned the challenges. We have an aging infrastructure. That's something that needs to be addressed, and there's going to be opportunities for innovation there. I think that's going to be an area where New England Water Innovation Network can play a role. Also, we have a eutrophication issue. We have a lot of nitrates and phosphates leaching into the soil and into the saltwater ponds and freshwater ponds. This is something that really has to be taken care of. So I think these are areas where the New England Water Innovation Network will focus. We are structured right now with a chair, a chairman, secretary, we have a treasurer, and then there's an advisory board. This will become the board of directors. And as far as funding, membership dues, there's also a private sector match grant that was offered by the public sector just to kind of help New and get off the ground. And then they're also looking at other revenue streams. A test bed network could be one. And I think one of the things that may be it's probably the most important factor for the early success of Newen is the strong, I mentioned it just a moment ago, the really strong business engagement. That's really been driving this. Governor Patrick got it started. I came in to help, facilitate and convene, but really it's moving forward on the backs of the private sector, and that was the idea of all along. So I think I'll stop right there and let my colleagues speak, and then we have plenty of time for an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Okay, Michael Murphy. All right. So next up, Glenn Schrader. He is official title, Associate Dean of Research and Administration, Chemical and Environmental Engineering at the University of Arizona. Glenn, however, is doing something really significant. He's on sabbatical, serving as CEO and president of the Southwest Water Technology Cluster. It's a 5-state U.S. and Mexico consortium, companies, universities, government agencies, laboratories, venture capital companies. And he's also serves as professor of chemical engineering at the University of Arizona. He's had a great background. He's worked at National Science Foundation as a program director, and he's been involved with Iowa State University as chief engineer of the Ames Laboratory at the U.S. Department of Energy. He's been an honorary faculty member at University of Queensland. I think that's in Australia? Yeah, okay. Okay. Royal Fellow for the Norwegian Institute of Technology in Norway, and also at the University of Sydney. So great international experience, great technical background, and now cutting edge of developing a cluster. Glenn?
Thanks very much, Eagles. And again, let me express my appreciation to David and Bruce, Eagles, our fellow conspirator, I think, in all this, and certainly with Sally, who has offered support to our cluster and many of the other clusters so consistently and effectively over the last several years, in fact. Probably the first thing I have to announce is that actually we have a new brand name. Although we are officially the Southwest Water Technology Cluster, we discovered then when we are working from West Texas through New Mexico, through Arizona, Nevada, California, and now Mexico, the Southwest name doesn't always mean the same thing to somebody in Mexico. So we're rebranded as H2O Stream. If you take the letter STREAM, it stands for Sustainable Water Technology and Resource Management for Arid Regions. And that's really what we're about. I appreciate the invitation to come up here because since you have so much extra water up here, my suitcase may be full of a few of these bottles as I go back today. In terms of our emphasis and focus for our water cluster, it's not surprising that here are some of the topics. New water, inland and ocean desalination, water reuse, industrial and municipal, conservation, that's a no-brainer for the Southwest, water resource management and policy. If you're in the Colorado River Basin, you know everything is dominated by all these water agreements along the Colorado River. Education and training. I think this is something that Sally has brought up again, that we need to train the water professionals of the future. We're very interested in the water, food, energy nexus. We spend about 20% of our power in the state of Arizona, like California, simply in moving water around the state. And of course, environmental concerns are extremely important to us in the Southwest. Eagles asked us to address, how did this water cluster really get started? I think actually it goes way back to the commonality that Sally mentioned. Many of us have been into sustainability for a long time, and water is at the forefront. But in terms of propelling our activity, I think that's what your terms. There have been two developments lately. One has been the Bureau of Reclamation has said that there's a 50-50 chance of a water emergency on the Colorado River in the next 3 to 4 years. Not 20 years away, not 25 years, not when climate change we think really kicks in, although we think it's happening now. So that's a big factor that has propelled our cluster. The other one is that our Central Arizona project managers made the startling announcement last spring that instead of having an infinite amount of water available for Phoenix and Tucson, that they were thinking that they might actually have to start to curtail water for those two cities. And that news item made it all the way to the New York Times, and those things are starting to be game changers for kind of the public acceptance of that we have a water challenge. We really want to move from water scarcity to water assurance. That's really what our theme has been for the Southwest Water Cluster. What are our most important success factors? I think some of these have been mentioned already. We need more testing and demonstration and deployment activities. You know, universities in the United States are really short of pilot plant facilities. That's why we're aligned with the Bureau of Reclamation, Sandia National Laboratories, the Los Alamos National Laboratories, to get and build some of those activities. So although I'm a former research dean, I think I'm more D in the R&D and more demonstration and deployment in education and training than maybe that first R. Another thing that I think has been brought out at this meeting a little bit also is that we see a paradigm shift in how technology would be accelerated and being moved into the marketplace. We're very focused on demand pull. We really think that there is a need for looking at what our water users need and kind of reverse engineering then how we should be organized in terms of projects, in terms of business plans to respond to that demand. So maybe not so much technology transfer in the old sense of the term. We think these new innovation ecosystems can be much more effective in addressing end user needs. Our governance, we're a 501c6, we do advocate, but at the core of our activity is what we call a business development council or councils. And these are sometimes led by our board of directors, which is dominated by people from industry, and identifying, brokering, and facilitating new business opportunities. So our goal really is to start new business or new business for existing businesses or new research contracts for universities. But it is really about new opportunities, new businesses, and I think that's what's exciting about these public-private partnerships that Sally has been talking about. Engagement of industry. Again, my board of directors is about 2/3 business, but we also have Sandia National Laboratories, Los Alamos, the Bureau of Reclamation sitting on our board of directors because I think, as Mike is saying, we need access also to bigger capacities, bigger networks, bigger associations where there's really no reason to reinvent the wheel or build another center when we can ally with other people that may be already addressing some of the problems that we want to do. So I'd just like to end by saying that we're very much in favor of this idea of a national network that would help coordinate the water clusters in the United States and in Mexico and Canada, because we think that's the level of competition that we're going to be facing in the future.
Thank you. Glenn Schrader. How many states in Mexico are involved?
So if you're really correct, it's 3.
Okay, there we go.
Baja California, North and South, and Sonora.
Wow, there we go. Fantastic. Okay, well, we're going to now move from the Southwest to Oregon, neighbors down south. David Kenny, he's the CEO of Oregon Best, and that is described as a catalyst organization that supports promising clean technologies, products, and services from early stage development to commercialization. And David has taken this organization from 1 FTE, which I think was you, right? Okay, and built it up to a 7 FTE and $3 million a year operation, which in the world of putting together these kinds of collaborations is really impressive, and a testament to his skill in organizing things and getting things financed, etc. Prior to starting that job, he was at Intel Corporation, and he helped build the Intel Solutions Services, a technical consulting organization, from again 0 start to a $20 million a year operation. So, in David, we have someone that has demonstrated his ability to take an idea and put a framework around it and make it happen and create it. So, David, let's hear about what's happening in Oregon.
Thank you, Eagles. Well, thank you all. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm particularly excited about the opportunity to do something in Washington, because I've been beating an Oregon-Washington drum for a few years, recognizing that there's so many opportunities for our states to collaborate that I think are sometimes jumped on and sometimes missed. As I look when I travel nationally and also globally, I think there's a lot of commonalities in our region that we should be partnering on. So it's exciting to be engaged in a conversation here, and perhaps the map will show a shared cluster at some point in the future. We are what I would describe kind of an emerging cluster from the perspective of water. My organization, Oregon Best, is really focused on clean technologies, and we've embraced water as one component of that, along with clean energy, green building, precision agriculture, and a variety of other things. And I think one of the advantages that gives us is the ability to look at water in the context of some larger technological advances and developments. And for example, smart cities is a much broader concept that describes the use of technology to leverage both infrastructure and the ways that cities can operate. And you'll see that being applied to transportation, electricity with microgrids and other kinds of technologies, as well as water and other kinds of both infrastructure and services. So that's one example. The Internet of Things is another big technology concept that's one of those big phrases that gets thrown around and means a lot of different things. But the idea of connecting things to the Internet rather than just people can apply to water just as much as to a lot of other industry sectors. And so from where I sit, I get to see a lot of those bigger movements and try to connect them with water as well. Our primary funder is the state of Oregon, and we're viewed as an economic development initiative, and our state has embraced innovation as well as clusters as a key strategy for economic development. And because, like Washington, we have a lot of strengths in renewable energy, energy efficiency, a long history of resource conservation, and a population that readily embraces a lot of clean technologies, we've identified that as one area from an industry sector perspective that our city of Portland, other cities, and the state government, economic development officials have all identified as a key area for us to invest in. And so we receive funding to help support the development and commercialization of new technologies. Organizationally, we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We have membership on our board from representatives of four of our research universities in the state, 2 national labs, including PNNL, which is really based up in Washington but has some presence in Oregon, and which we've really tried to embrace as a regional resource, as well as National Energy Technology Lab, which has an outpost in Oregon, while it's actually based in Pittsburgh. And a lot of industry partners as well, including our local utility, CH2M Hill, Solar World, and others. So we have organized our programs, focused on research programs where we work closely with our university partners in identifying research centers of excellence that we can try to continue to build and grow. Water technologies is one of the areas that we've identified, one of 4 to focus on. And then we also have a commercialization program where we fund projects where startup companies are working with universities to advance their technology to market faster. And of the 30 or so projects that we've funded, 9 of them have a direct connection to water technologies, 2 of which have just announced follow-on private sector investments in the last 2 weeks from venture capitalists and others. So we're seeing traction and follow-on investment. As Sally mentioned, there are a number of firms involved in both investment and M&A in the water technology arena, and we're hoping to plug into some of that. I think I should probably stop as well. I have a tendency to go on for a long time when I talk, so I think since I paused to breathe, I'm gonna stop, and I'll share more when the questions come up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Let's thank David. Okay. Back on our home turf, Joel Baker. He is the Science Director, Center for Urban Waters, and Director of the UW, or for those of you out of town, University of Washington, Puget Sound Institute Professor, and Port of Tacoma Chair in Environmental Science, and at the University of Washington, Tacoma. Joel has been an important intellectual research force here in Tacoma and helped drive the interest of the community around the issues around water, particularly urban water, stormwater, etc. So hopefully many of you who are interested to see his work and his laboratory after this conference closes down, we hope to see you there. You'll learn a lot more about what kind of work is going on there. So I won't go about a big process of describing what you do. That's going to be part of your discussion. So, Joel, and I'm happy you're here. We heard that you had a little issue last night, and I'm glad to say that it wasn't as serious as we thought it might have been. But anyway, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Eagles. My house was broken into last night. It wasn't, and don't worry about it. It was fine. If anyone has a extra iPad they could loan me, I would appreciate it. So thank you. Thanks to the organizers. As I look out, at least half the people in the room were involved in developing the cluster that I'm about to describe. So I'm really here representing the broad community here in Tacoma. And I would say to my colleague from Oregon, if you want to foster collaborations, if you could get the football team to kind of lay down next weekend, UW could probably use a little bit of a help there. That would go a long way. We could work that together. So I want to say just a few words about the technology cluster. You've already heard a fair bit about it at this conference, and indeed the Wellspring conference is one of the products of this cluster. So you already know a fair bit about it. But I would say that the Clean Water Innovation Cluster here in Tacoma it really reflects the history of Tacoma in this region in the following way. Tacoma, like many coastal cities in the United States, has gone through a series of or an evolution of economic models, really starting with timber and shipping, things of that nature. So we really have evolved from in extractive technologies to more manufacturing, and now into the sort of information space, which you heard about yesterday as well. And as the city became revitalized, and as the tideflat area, the Port of Tacoma, and the surrounding areas began to imagine what they were going to do after shifting in the economy, it became pretty clear, I think, to this community that they wanted to do something that was reflective of the future, and really made an investment in something that was forward-looking, and came upon the idea of clean water after it's a very deliberative discussion and conversation. So the reason that there's a cluster in Tacoma dedicated to clean water technologies is really, I think, the recognition that This community spent a lot of money cleaning up the environment here. I think to their great credit, and this was well before I came, recognize that cleaning it up is not the end of the story, that keeping it clean is at least as big of a problem as cleaning it in the first place. And that leads immediately to stormwater. So the Theophos waterway, which is 500 meters in that direction, the city and led an effort with many other partners of $100 million and change to clean up the fairly small body of water. Recognized immediately that recontamination from stormwater could wipe out all of the investments that were made. So it's just really key to get smart about this, and so it's a natural fit to have a sort of a center built around the idea of stormwater and clean water technology. So that's kind of the history of the city and the history of this region and how we got to where we are. Frankly, the center of here crystallized a number of coincident activities that were happening in Tacoma in this region, and kind of brought everything in together really quite nicely. Some of that was inadvertent, I think. Some of it just was happenstance. And let me tell you what those are. One is, as I mentioned, the city took the lead in cleaning up the Foss waterway with their partners. They built a lot of homegrown talent. They invested in people as part of the cleanup. You heard some of that yesterday. Many of the people who were up here yesterday worked for the Port of Tacoma, worked for the City of Tacoma. Those were people who kind of learned how to do this by cleaning up the Foss waterway. So investment in human capital is sort of very much ingrained in the community here. So that was going on. At about the same time, the University of Washington decided or were cajoled into creating a campus here in Tacoma, the first branch campus of the University of Washington. This campus is different than the Seattle campus. It's smaller, obviously, but it's also different in an important way. It's focused on urban issues. It's very much designed in its DNA to be what we call an urban serving university. So I get actually credit for doing things in urban areas as part of my day job at the university, which I may not if I was in another place. So the university was created here as well. At about the same time, or shortly thereafter, the state and the federal government have renewed their interest in Puget Sound. There's always been a Puget Sound program, but under Governor Gregoire and with support from Congressman Norm Dix, really a new effort was created about the restoration of the Puget Sound program. That program is also located here in Tacoma. It's a state agency, but it's located in Tacoma. So new energy into the Puget Sound. And then finally, sort of in a broader, more abstract scale, this overall pivot of, overused word, but look westward towards the Pacific Rim countries and thinking about economic development in the Pacific Rim, thinking about collaborative opportunities. The Pacific Rim is a very interesting place in clean water, not only because they have some of the dirtiest water around, but they also have some of the most innovative, creative talent, and they're building cities at a tremendous rate. So there's a huge opportunity to get in there and try new things. We see a great opportunity for collaboration there. So all those things were happening in this region, and I think this Clean Water Innovation Technology Cluster helped to kind of put a point to it and bring some of those things together. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what this cluster is going to be when it grows up. We've been at this for a couple of 2, 3, 4 years, and I think we're following a little bit different path than some of the others. Here's the idea that we're kicking around, and I'm going to leave it at that. The idea here, I think, is that clean water technologies is not strictly an engineering problem. I was trained as an engineer, and I know many people in the room are engineers. But ask yourself the question, why do things work when they work? Or conversely, why don't they work? Is it, when something works really well in the clean water sector, is it because it's just such an amazingly brilliant technology that it has to work? Or there's just no way this thing could fail, right? Or is it because the right people got in the right place at the right time, the conditions were right, the structures were right? So our premise in this clean water cluster here in Tacoma is it's not just engineering, it's systems, and it's people, and it's asking questions about how, what needs to happen in order for clean water to really work together. So for us, it's as much a social science issue, a political science issue, as it is a natural science and engineering issue. I think that's an interesting, I'm sure it's an interesting idea. It's hard to kind of crystallize that idea. We're still messing around with exactly what that means, but that's kind of the theme here. And I think Lorna Maureen captured it really well yesterday when she said the program she runs, the STRAP program, if you were here, this characterizing the piping system in Tacoma, is not the camera. It's the people who run the camera. It's the whole program. And I think for us, clean water technology is not the engineering. It's the people, and it's the systems, the political systems and the social systems that run the technologies. So that's in a nutshell what I think the Tacoma Water Cluster is about. I'd be glad to discuss it further as we have the discussion.
Okay, Joel Baker. So Sally, you get the stage again, but from the standpoint of Confluence, which is a cluster consisting, I think, of Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana, right, as you had up on the chart. So why don't you just reflect a little bit on the origins of that, success factors, and share that cluster story with folks. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you again, Eagles. Interestingly enough, the cluster there in this region really had its origins through a directive that we received from then Administrator of EPA Lisa Jackson, and then Administrator of the U.S. Small Business Administration, Karen Mills. So Administrator Jackson and Administrator Mills kind of befriended one another, and as many of you know, Karen Mills was very involved in drafting and documents around the concept of clusters, and I think she's a co-author of a publication, Clusters and Competitiveness. But somehow in the federal family and at the levels of government that they operated in, they befriended one another. And Administrator Jackson knew that in Cincinnati she had a significant asset, and that is the huge R&D operation. And Cincinnati has been a center for federally sponsored water research for over a century, so it's got a very, very long legacy in this field, and it's the largest federal water research facility in the country, so it's a pretty significant asset. And Administrator Jackson really understood that perhaps the community could leverage that in a way that they had not previously, and really charged the staff there to lead an effort to organize and to inform the community leaders about this asset and many other assets that they had in the region around water technologies. So staff from EPA and the U.S. Small Business Administration undertook this process to meet with stakeholders. We were very organized around that, wheel, that Technopolis wheel. We hired Fred Phillips, who's a cluster specialist, to come out and help us, because of course this is not something that we had done before, but we brought together stakeholders from those sectors and really acted as a catalyst to really convene the partners. We always said from the beginning that although EPA and SBA were very involved, that we did not own the cluster. That cluster had to be owned and governed by the regional leadership. And we had a number of folks that stepped up to that, and they organized themselves pretty quickly. This happened in about a 6-month period of time. They really organized themselves into a working body. They developed a strategy around, how they would really do this. So we got a nod, at the beginning from the different stakeholders pretty quickly that they were interested in pursuing it. Cluster strategy was not like, you described in terms of a statewide effort around clusters in Ohio or Kentucky or Indiana, so it wasn't like that, but they were very much enamored and really were convinced that it could work. And from there emerged this group of leaders, and they formed a nonprofit organization, and that nonprofit organization is called Confluence. And there is an executive director and a board that governs that particular cluster organization that now has really is the force that's keeping all the partners together. There's a broad range of partners that are part of the governance structure. So there's the University of Cincinnati, the University of Dayton, Northern Kentucky University. There are 3 economic development agencies that are involved because, you do have this tri-state type of coverage that you're trying to do. There's an entity that really is responsible for more regional planning, and they're part of it. There's 2 stewardship organizations, one called Green Umbrella, and then there's another one called the Miami Conservancy District, who also sit on the board. There's Procter & Gamble sits on the board, and as does Veolia. Veolia has a facility up in the Dayton area, and they sit as part of the governance. There is a UV disinfection technology company in Northern Kentucky, Aquionics, that also participates, and there are a number of startup groups that are startup companies that are also in play there. Badger Meter has a presence, has a footprint in the region, and they are now active partners in the effort. It's about 4 years old, so it's still making progress. And I think some of the important choices that the group made at the beginning, they really were advised themselves. Maybe that's important to say. Through their network, they advised themselves not to undertake a chasing of federal money right away. So they have yet to file any type of application for federal funding from SBA or anything, and they're very measured in how they are operating. So it's a small group, very much funded by this group of stakeholders. That's how they make their money. They have an annual event that they execute on, not unlike Wellspring here. And so they've made a lot of progress. It is a little bit different for EPA there in that we are physically there, and I sit as an ex officio member of that board. So they value the EPA input there and really, really leveraging the assets that we have, the physical assets that we have in that. And that would be characteristic like one would go about, the other national labs that, one of the things that we can do as federal agencies is fund things and walk away, which we do pretty routinely, but it's a totally different game to be in those rooms with the stakeholders every time as they're trying to work through issues and trying to make progress. And having been so involved in the efforts to really encourage the development of the relationships there, I think the agency has moved really to let the baby walk, because at first we were so involved, and then now the baby's growing up, and it's amazing to see the progress that they're having in helping the water industry thrive. They're about to hold a algal toxin summit that is an outgrowth of the problem that we had with the toxin in the water supply for Toledo, Ohio, as an example of how they're trying to capitalize and really trying to do what they can in terms of responding with action whenever there is a water-related problem. They've done a heck of a job in the public relations and marketing of the cluster. I don't think you could have had a better group organized around that. It's been amazing where they've gotten play and where they've gotten notoriety. It's just, I think, for a very small, dedicated group, there's no bricks and mortar, so there isn't like that's the Confluence Cluster building. There isn't anything like that. It's very much a virtual type of organization. Mm-hmm. So that is the model that's been selected there in that region. It's complicated because of the 3 states.
Okay. Sally Gutierrez. Thank you. So I want you all out there to be thinking about lightning questions. I heard that yesterday. Lightning talks are great. So lightning questions are short, to the point. I'm going to be taking 3 at a time, so we give a menu of options to the panelists, so we don't have the panelists all spending time maybe on one question and beating it to death. So think about the questions, and let me make a couple of comments, my own observations as moderator on this thing. We did not hear from the panelists a lot about hard infrastructure, technology or engineering or assets. They're all mentioned, but what people were focusing on were some of the soft infrastructure that makes a cluster, and I prefer to call them innovation ecosystems because I think clusters are kind of an econometric term, and I think an ecosystem is more reflective of what's happening. But in order for these clusters to grow organically, they need 4 elements, at least in my view, and observing them across the world. 1, they need leadership, so we heard about that. Who do you have involved? And in particular, the role of the business community, to what degree they are driving some of the conversation and the dialogue in the community. So that's a critical element. Strategy, that's also important. In order to get people to convene around something, you need to be discussing, well, what's the purpose? What's the objective? What are going to be the metrics? How are we going to get there? What's the roadmap? So strategy is terribly important, and there needs to be consensus built on strategy. I think a third element, you need some kind of governance structure, to collect money, to guide the thing, to give it some kind of institutional capacity. And there are we heard a variety of ways of how to organize something like that. And finally, you need a culture, in my opinion. I don't think it's possible to build a cluster or an innovation ecosystem if the culture does not support collaborative behavior. There needs to be kind of an ethic that, there's payoff in collaboration, and I'm willing to take the time and effort to collaborate. It may be frustrating, it may be difficult, it may take a lot of your time, but at the end of the day, the culture has to be supportive of collaboration. So these are the soft elements that I think are really those are my takeaways. What I'm hearing from the observations of our 5 clusters that we've had here. Okay, so it's lightning question time, and we have one microphone?
No, we have 2, but
2?
Just real quick, if the panelists could turn your phones off, we're getting a little bit of feedback. If anybody's on Wi-Fi or doing Bluetooth up there, probably you, Eagles.
That's me, huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
That was you.
I'm a digital disruptor, not a virus.
So lightning questions.
So let's take 3 questions.
Yeah.
We got one over here.
All right.
We have a microphone?
Yep, right behind you.
Right behind you. And what's your question? Then we'll go to number 2 over there. Number 3.
I have a question.
You have a question. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's take 3.
So I actually love the framework of the 4 elements to a successful ecosystem of innovation. One of the things that we've been looking at regionally, not just Pierce County, Tacoma, but across Puget Sound, is this movement and investment in green infrastructure and clean water overall. The Russell Family Foundation came out with a report over the summer doing a landscape scan of their investments and partners' investments. One of the things identified in there was lack of a unifying, clear goal that everybody was working towards within that. I feel like that might be one more piece that needs to be a part of the ecosystem. It's maybe that's part of what makes the culture, but I would love to hear what to you all is the unifying goal. Clean water is a clear potential for that, but is it something more? Does clean water itself drive innovation?
Okay, a question on unifying goals. Okay, number 2. And be thinking about which ones you'd like to address. Yeah.
What do each of you see as the primary function, or maybe primary and secondary function, of large or even mega corporations in these clusters? And then also a question of the frequency of how frequent do you find it successful that these clusters and the various representatives in the clusters meet with one another to frequently check with the various stakeholders and make sure that all the problems are being addressed in an efficient manner?
The question is defining success. Is that kind of one of the...
specifically around frequency of meeting and making sure that we can tie in all of the stakeholders for each cluster.
Right. Okay, good. Question number 2. Number 3.
Most industries have big guns in them. Aerospace has Airbus and Boeing. Technology has many, including Microsoft and Google, just 2 examples. Water is an enormous industry. Who are the big gorillas on the private sector side in the water industry? And if there aren't any, why aren't there any?
Interesting question. Looking for gorillas. Okay, terrific. All right, so we have 3 questions, and someone raise your hand on the panel and answer one. Who would like to start? Okay, Glenn?
I think I can address the clear goals and the unifying purposes. We see those very clearly in the Southwest, maybe because we're going to be a poster child for climate change and running out of water. So for example, one of our business development councils is focusing on inland desalination using renewable energy. We have a technology that uses solar thermal energy at very high temperatures, and it allows us to recover all of the water, and it allows us to process the salts. So this is basically a zero discharge system. Who's interested in this? Well, everything from the city of Hermosillo, who now only gets water 2 or 3 hours a day. They're running out of water, to the Elephant Butte Irrigation District in New Mexico. There are 150-year-old farms there that now cannot irrigate their crops. But we also have the president of IDE Americas, who's building the largest desalination plant in North America in Carlsbad. He's interested because he thinks the environmental and climate change problems associated with traditional RO is not going to be viable in 5 to 10 years. So again, that theme has united us across 5 states in the United States and Mexico.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to take on a question? All right, Michael.
Sure. Definitely a couple questions there I'd like to address. With New England Water Innovation Network, really the goal that they've set out for themselves is local innovation for global markets. So in Massachusetts and around Boston, there's a lot of companies, a lot of innovation, yet there's not a market for all of those companies. So really what NEWIN would like to do is work to expedite the commercialization process and find these local innovations, deal with the challenges on a local level, but market those globally. That's an outlined mission for the New England Water Innovation Network. The primary function of corporations in clusters, in our cluster group, we see 3 large companies that have had a really astounding impact on what we're doing. Xylem, AECOM, and CDM Smith have all been very active with what we're doing. It also kind of answers the question, maybe who are some of the big gorillas. Xylem's a very large company, but now AECOM and URS are together, so perhaps that could be a gorilla in the water industry. But Xylem, AECOM, and CDM Smith have been very important partners for the New England Water Innovation Network. So,
okay. Anybody else here would like to take on a question?
I'll make a couple comments on the question of frequency, because I think there are a variety of types of ways of convening stakeholders. An event like this, which can be an annual event, is a great way of bringing in people from around the country and disseminating sort of cluster-wide information and education. I think there's a lot of value in adding, though, more frequent and more informal interactions. And a lot of my experience in this actually is from other sectors, both that I've participated in as well as observed. In Portland, the Northwest Environmental Business Council, which is actually active both in Washington and Oregon, has a monthly breakfast series that has a guest speaker. It's usually local and is a way of gathering people, and it turns into a really robust networking environment as well as educational. And even more informal than that, the athletic and outdoor industry in Portland, which is with Nike and Columbia and Adidas America, and a lot of other companies headquartered there. There's become a real robust network of startups that have spun out of those companies, and they have a young professionals network, which is one of those really just sort of happy hour kind of informal networking, but really is the kind of event that you'll often hear attributed with sort of the birth of startup type of companies, where people are sharing ideas across different aspects of a sector. So I think if you're trying to spur innovation, I think a lot of informal networking opportunities are really critical, in addition to the more formalized conference kinds of activities. In terms of more formal governance kinds of things, I think I've seen everything from monthly to quarterly, kind of like board or task force or advisory board kind of meetings, to help sort of drive forward agendas that are kind of aligned with that clear goal, which I would agree is also a critically important part of getting a cluster to move forward as a unified group.
Okay. Yeah, Joe?
To address the goal question a little bit and maybe flesh that idea out a shade, and so everything I know about economic development I've learned from the two experts sitting at the front table here, Connie and Bruce, so take this with a grain of salt. It seems to me that there's a standard economic development model, right, where and a lot of the clean water technology things we've talked about here and we've talked about nationally kind of fit that model where somebody is developing a new device or a new technique or a new membrane, and you're scaling that to market. I would suggest that the clusters obviously have an important role to play in that process. I would suggest that clean water technology type clusters, because it's inherently, there's an environmental benefit to it as well, can play a secondary role. And the secondary role goes something like, if we make it easier and cheaper to protect the environment, then you've improved your business climate either in your city or in your state or in your country, and you've lowered the cost of business. That's an economic development model. It's not creating a new widget or a new factory to build a widget, but it's just lowering the cost of business. So I hope that's included in the discussion of when we talk about economic development. Let's not forget the important role that the clusters could play in increasing efficiencies and reducing the cost of keeping the environment clean. Thinking about the presentations that were made this morning.
Bruce, on the question on gorillas, I think my observation when I went to WEFTEC, which is this monster trade show of water folks, 40,000 people in New Orleans a couple weeks ago, and I went to the Innovation Pavilion, right, and that were showcasing startup companies and entrepreneurs, which was very exciting. And what I discovered is a number of clusters, like Milwaukee, were really interested in promoting the entrepreneurial process as a way of getting to new solutions, right? So I think it's about finding the gazelles, so to speak, right, and who eventually maybe transform themselves into gorillas over time. But it's really kind of encouraging all these new ideas and entrepreneurs, get going. And I think every one of your clusters has an entrepreneurial component to it, I think. Is that right? Is that fair to say? Right. As part of the strategy. So maybe the big players are not going to be the guys that are going to drive the future. It's going to be kind of a whole new set of players, which I think is partially generational as well, because of the passion the young people I saw had about trying to solve this kind of big problem. So that's very cool. All right. Anybody else, or we take another 3 questions? What do you think? Are you guys ready? Okay. So 3 more lightning questions. I know they're out there, so speak up. And have we got a hand going up someplace? Okay. Have we got someone? Okay, there's one over there. There's another one over there. 2 over there. Is there another one? There's one over there. Okay, there are 3. Okay. We may not have time for another round of 3, but if we do, get ready with your questions.
Me first? Okay. I am from Milwaukee. I don't profess myself to be an expert on the water cluster there, but it seemed to me there were a couple of things, a couple of ingredients that were there that helped launch that whole effort. One was an identity that the cluster could rally around, and it was coined Fresh Coast. I always feel like we're looked down by the people on the West Coast or the East Coast because we're the flyover country. But Fresh Coast was something that the whole community could kind of rally around as, yeah, this is what we're going to be about. And the other one was having kind of an anchor industry, like a really recognized name in the industry, and they had Badger Meter right there that was able to be this nucleus for the other companies to rally around. Just curious from the perspectives of the other groups here, what do you have? What is that anchor and what is that identity that you're rallying your groups around?
Okay. Let's get another question. I think there are two over here, if I recall. There we are. Go.
So, are you folks aware of any regulation that creates monopoly and thus discourages entrepreneurs in the industry?
Did you get that question? Okay. All right. Thank you. And one more.
All right. That's loud. Product developer. I'm not the only one here. And so that's my excuse for asking this question. If you had a widget that could be installed on every highway drain, in every car, in every house, in every small business, and it did something, and what it could do is separate, remove, or recombine, which of those would it do, and what would be the material it did that to?
Okay. All right. Three interesting questions. There we go. Okay, so who wants to take them on? Or take one on? There we go, Joel. There we go. In a pinch, Joel's ready.
I'll take the second question, which I think of the three is the easiest of it. So I'm not aware of any regulations that result in a monopoly, but one of the things we observe all the time is that the lack of consistent testing methodology and certification methodology nationwide slows down the pace of adoption of new technologies, and therefore gives a competitive advantage to those who have made it through the process, and that's something that concerns us. We spend a lot of time through the TAPE program here in Washington State of trying to make it more efficient, make it more streamlined. Our mantra in running that program with the Department of Ecology here is to just get more quivers into the more arrows into the quiver of the local jurisdictions who are fighting these stormwater problems. So I think that's the one example I can think of where it's not so much a regulation preventing, it's an inefficient process and lack of consistency across the country that makes it difficult to get your products certified and then adopted into the marketplace.
Okay. Glenn?
I think I'll try the first question a little bit about what has been kind of the business or industrial basis, I think, for the water cluster. And there's no doubt for us in the Southwest, we think we're a little industry light. That's a challenge that we've had, and that's probably one of the reasons why our cluster kind of resembles a network. Like I say, it's western Texas through New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, Southern California, and to Mexico. But what we do find in our region is certainly industries that depend on water a lot, and so we're connecting to those. A good example, perhaps, is north of Tucson in the Chandler area. We have an Intel plant that has two very big fab lines, and we're pretty certain that manufacturing facility would not be there except for the fact that we've had a center that's now in our cluster that emphasized water reuse, recycling, water purification. And in fact, it now even exchanges water with the city of Chandler, so it's really kind of in an ecosystem where the community and the manufacturing facility are really pretty well linked together. But again, I think, sometimes we get some surprises too. The mining industry is very interested in our water cluster. These pit lakes that are found in the Southwest, the evaporation from those pit lakes is the equivalent of 2 Niagara Falls. Okay? And there's valuable minerals in those pit lakes that we think we could recover. Also, the agriculture industry in California and Arizona is definitely facing water challenges, and we think new sources of water for those industries are going to be extremely important. So again, I think water clusters always look to these alliances with other industries too, and that's where the real success can be.
Okay. Anyone else like to address one of the questions? Yeah. There you go, David.
I'm going to take a risk and try to take on the identity question, because I don't know if we've actually figured that out yet, and we're taking advantage of Sally's presence here. She's going to spend the next 2 days down in Oregon meeting with folks who are embracing the cluster concept of water in Oregon. We're going to have meetings in Portland and Corvallis. She's also going to participate in a couple of water lab ribbon cuttings at Oregon State University tomorrow. And I think there are a few areas in Oregon that sort of resonate, I think, in terms of identity, and it's a really good question, because I think the idea of the fresh coast, having a single thing that you can get everyone to rally around, is a great concept. And I don't know if we have a single one as much as a few different ones. And I think one thing that Portland in particular has developed a global reputation for is its green building expertise. And thinking about building scale as well as neighborhood scale. The city of Portland also created this concept of eco-districts, which has been embraced and actually spun out an organization which is now sort of a national nonprofit leading the eco-districts movement around neighborhood scale solutions to challenges, including water management. And I think thinking about water as a building scale or neighborhood scale solution is one area. And then ag is another, which I think we're not unique in having a significant ag sector in Oregon, but we have both dry land agriculture in the eastern part of the state, as well as more traditional and a lot of specialty crops in the Willamette Valley. And I think connections between both water quality of runoff as well as water quantity management issues with agriculture is another area that I think there's a lot of thought leadership in our state.
Very good. Michael?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at a few of those as well. Number one, the rallying cry, I guess if you will. For the New England Water Innovation Network, I mentioned it just a moment ago, it's been a lot of talk about our local innovations for global markets. Around what I see are going to be challenges in aging infrastructure, water quality, and the eutrophication challenge that places like Cape Cod face. So I see New England Water Innovation the network taking on these three challenges and looking to really become a leader in the technologies that are already in Massachusetts, but really have not been tested out. They're not verified. There's some really interesting things happening with some of our young companies. So it brings me back to, local innovation for global markets is where Newen really sees itself. And I'll take a stab at number 3 since no one else has, and it is a really great question. I think what would be interesting, and this is also related to Cape Cod, a low-cost, very cheap sensor that could be easily deployed, and data could be collected quite easily from a simple app, so thereby being able to receive many data points very fast with a low-cost sensor. This is something that's not, I don't know if anyone's working on it or it's already out there. We haven't seen it in Massachusetts, but perhaps it's something that can help identify those real hot spots. We kind of know where they're at in Cape Cod and other areas along the coast, but that would have to be coupled with some sort of low-cost treatment. That's also a challenge we're facing. That's not really a widget. I guess that gets to combining, you said separate, remove, or combine. I guess that gets to combining technologies. A low-cost sensor with also a low-cost retrofit treatment for nutrient removal. If we could find that, that's sort of the holy grail for Cape Cod and New England. Cape Cod is a cash cow for the region, so we're trying to figure out how we can figure out what we can do there and what solutions can be deployed. And then those are challenges that many places around the world have. Then perhaps those can be deployed elsewhere.
Okay, very good. So I have a final question for the panel. I'm going to take the prerogative now to kind of wrap it up. I think we're kind of coming toward the end, right? Last question. So one of the themes that Sally had in her keynote address was the formation of a national network of water clusters. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think might be the glue or the force or whatever that will create such a network that's meaningful? You know, it's not just us convening from time to time. I think we enjoy each other's company, but how do we kind of take it to the next level, you know, in terms of maybe collective problem solving, that kind of thing? Do you see an opportunity to maybe bring others into that network? So, for example, here in Washington, we have a big food cluster. We have a big energy cluster. We have a big IT cluster. We have drones now, you know, we're a big cluster in drones, et cetera. I could see how the IT industry has a lot to contribute to water quality and clean water issues. There's an intersection between water and agriculture and food that's very important. And obviously the energy system in our state, it's clean, you know, hydro. We rely upon water, the Columbia River Basin, for, you know, inexpensive, clean energy. So the idea of that the network might just be water clusters getting together, but maybe there's an opportunity to invite other sectors to be part of the problem solving that this network will be into. But anyway, just opine very, very briefly to close things out. Do you think such a network has value? How do you see it evolving? Where should the leadership come from? You know, what's next for building the network is basically the question. I mean, all right, so should we just go from you, Michael, down the row? Okay, we're going to go down the row. Well, Sally, you can tie a bow on this whole thing, okay?
Well, these are great closing questions for discussion. I certainly think there's the opportunity for a national network. If we're able to harness our capabilities and our resources, we can do it. We certainly can. I think it would really benefit overall just our ability to share knowledge and data. I think that would be a tremendous value added for all of the local clusters, not having, and companies, not having to reinvent the wheel or repilot somewhere where they've already done it before. I realize that, you know, systems are different in different places, but where knowledge can be shared and data can be shared, that's an efficiency that can be gained. I think a national network can certainly help to get us there. I also think a national network around water clusters would be an interesting new energy to the water industry overall. At every water conference I go to, I hear this is a conservative industry. Well, why does it have to be that way? I don't know. I mean, treating water has been successful for a long time. We know how to do it. We haven't deviated from it too much. However, perhaps there's a way that we can infuse new energy into it without deviating from technologies that work and without going in a different direction from new technologies that might work. As far as glue holding this together, consistent engagement for one, which we've been pretty successful over the last few years, but you're talking about taking it to the next level, and I think that's the right question. How do we do that? Well, we certainly have to have clear objectives for all of the stakeholders involved and a really clear mandate that we devise for ourselves. Perhaps a testing network is a way we can do this. Maybe that's a glue. Sharing the information that we're testing in our home networks. Not really sure who should lead this. You know, EPA has done a good job, but it really needs to probably move into the business community. So then who is that? Who does that? Perhaps it's a national business council for, you know, water sustainability or innovation ecosystems or something like this. Maybe it's just, you know, us and we create this. That's probably what's going to happen. And I certainly see that the group in New England would be very supportive and participate in this effort. You know, right now they're really just trying to get their feet under them, and a national network is probably not on their radar, or probably is on their radar, but not in the near term. But that doesn't mean it couldn't happen, and I certainly think it should move forward.
Okay.
And I'm certainly happy to continue in the effort and participating in the effort to make it happen.
So you're still committed to moving forward to the next level?
Of course.
The S strategy. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
There we go. All right. Dave. Glenn?
Great. Thanks very much. And, I think those of us who have been working on these water clusters are kind of in this agreement zone right now that something more is needed. As Mike says, this is kind of a fragmented industry. It's very interconnected with other industries, but the water industry never really gets the attention I think that it deserves. I mean, we have a Department of Energy. We have other departments. Why is this that water hasn't been elevated to this level? I think we enunciated at this meeting some of these grand challenges that the nation is going to have to face. It's not just us in the Southwest that are going to run out of water. So I think the time is right, because the clusters have look like they're successful, and that's a really good time then to try to move to the next level, I think, because otherwise, we'll have a few failures probably, but let's move while we still have mostly looking like successes that can address these grand challenges. What would be the glue that would help us participate? Well, our cluster really is a network, or we call it actually an alliance. I like the term alliance a little bit better because it's more proactive, and actually that word translates into Spanish and Mexican much better also about the positive movement about that. We think water clusters and a network would reduce the risk for all of us. It will reduce the risk for us as a cluster. It'll reduce the risk for businesses that are starting up. The shared knowledge of what others have done, best practices, everything, I think, and the regulatory environment will, as we start collaborating and working together, I think that risk is going to go down. As far as the leadership goes, I just think of this idea of a public-private partnership is key. I've been a faculty member for almost 40 years, so just going to the federal government expecting them to have all the money and resources and everything to solve it, I think we all know that's over. Or else there's a big change going on. So I think there's a lot of excitement about how EPA has put this together from the onset, that it is a public-private partnership, that we're in this together, and I suggest we keep on moving.
Okay. Joel?
I'll be shorter because I agree with what the first two comments said. So I think there's a couple of backbone things that need to happen. That all the clusters are sharing the same common needs. Some of it's pretty wonky. It's just how you set up, how you govern. I think there could be some coordination and some efficiencies of continuing to talk among the groups of what works and what doesn't work. The other thing I think is, and I said this already, is that we're in desperate need of is uniformity across testing and assessment of technology, so that we're all talking in the same language, and all of the various approaches are being subjected to the same rigor of testing, and we're all clear about communicating that. One of the really interesting things about the United States is it's such a diverse environment. So what is going to work in the Pacific Northwest may not work at all in Arizona, because it's a much drier system, may not work in the southeastern United States. So taking advantage of the fact that the clusters are in different geographic locations is a great strategy. I agree that this should continue to move forward. It seems like many of these clusters are sort of at the same stage of development. We're kind of at the first. We've left the launch pad, but we're waiting for the second stage to kick in. And I'm going to agree with you on the governance. I think it really does need to be a private public partnership of some flavor. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it's certainly not a government-led, exclusively government-led issue, because so much of it is rests with the private sector. So.
Excellent. And David?
I'm relatively new to this network, but I can say that the work that Sally has done has really been critical, and I think one of the things that's often rare in government leaders are those who are willing to kind of take on a leadership role when they don't actually have the resources to implement the strategy they're developing. And I've worked with our governor's office lots of times, and they often are hesitant to lay out a strategy because they don't have the resources to implement it. And I say to them, you have a bully pulpit. You have the opportunity to lay out a vision, and there's lots of organizations out there that want to be able to plug in and be part of that vision, that big, clear goal, whether it's a national goal or a regional goal, and they have their own resources, whether it's a private or a public sector. Being able to be part of a bigger strategy is really important. And so I think I haven't been working with Sally for long, but what she's done is help lay out this vision, and all these local organizations and regions are now plugging into that. Because I know for a fact that EPA doesn't have the resources to implement anything at a significant scale. EPA, every time I meet anyone from EPA, right, they're one of the most under-resourced from an R&D perspective, especially where I interact, of any federal agency. And so being able to just paint that vision and travel around like Sally's doing is actually one of the most important things from a network building perspective. A couple other points on the network. One is to get funded, startup companies that are developing new technologies need to be able to describe a vision in which they're going to be able to deploy their product, probably worldwide, and at least nationally. Just serving the local market isn't going to be enough. And so having a network of other entities that are willing to partner with each other to help each other get their companies' products spread around the country is critical. And I can assure everyone here, and I'm sure we'd all agree, that our region's not going to invent the solution to every water challenge out there. So we're going to be part of, through this network, we're going to solve many larger problems. And it doesn't make sense for us to all solve the same problem independently either. And then the other thing is, because of the comment I made about EPA, I mean, there's a critical need for more federal investment on water. Energy is, if you look at the Department of Energy research budget compared with EPA's around anything that they are supporting, it's embarrassing what we're spending as a national government on environmental challenges, including water. And I think collectively, one of the important roles that a network can do is advocate and help to be a voice. If you look out 50 years, I mean, I think everyone in this room understands the crisis that's ahead of us globally around water, and that has not been embraced yet. And I think probably many of you have seen Jon Stewart's rant recently about the House Space Science and Technology Committee, where climate change has been embraced everywhere in the world except for the House Science Technology Committee, which is full of climate deniers. And I think there needs to be a collective voice to recognize the level of investment we need to be making nationally. So I think that's another key point that a network could help support.
Great.
So I'll end with that, and we'll let.
Yeah.
All right.
Sally?
So I get to kind of wrap this up in terms of I'm so happy to continue to hear that the cluster leaders want to continue to work together, and I do think that is the key to the success of this at a national level and certainly beyond the boundaries. I think we have a good model. I put the Technopolis wheel up, kind of in the first slide, and it, defines all of these sectors, and I think that is still a good organizing framework for the broader network, so to speak. So that's a way that it could be thought about in terms of how would you populate that governing board over the effort around the national and what will be more than likely a global network, because that is kind of where we are really. It's a global network, not just on a national scale, and that's another opportunity, another whole other dialogue. I think there will one of the kind of things that it's just like where we are right now. Many of the efforts are very early on in their development, so the national network, kind of the way we are is probably not a bad thing, but as soon as there is enough capacity in the individual clusters, then I think at that stage it would be appropriate to really hunker down and get the leaders together to talk about what does that governance structure need to look like, and how should that be configured, and without losing the importance of the local connections. So the last thing we need is some higher level governing board that forgets about the great leadership that's right here. And as long as we never lose sight of the importance of that sense of right here, of the communities within which these efforts reside, then we'll be okay.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you very much. Well, I want to thank the panel, and then I have a couple of remarks I wanted to make. But anyway, thank you. So, two quotes and a thank you. Daniel Burnham was a very famous architect at the turn of the century, important player in Chicago, and when the Chicago fire happened, he was part of the civic community that rebuilt Chicago to become the great second city in the 1893 Chicago Exposition, which was quite a remarkable event for the history of Chicago, and a remarkable event for business leadership, I might add. But he had a great quote when he was trying to pitch the creation of this great exhibition. He said, "Make no small plans. They have no power to stir men's hearts." I think that's very important. We need to learn how to think big. But then there's another one that I heard from the head of Mercedes-Benz, and it caught my ear. He also said, "Think big, but start small, but act now." So, in a way, we have all these little clusters, across the country, right? But we're thinking big. We're thinking big. And we're seeing that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves, right? And making a contribution, to something more important, and we share a vision. So that's very, very powerful to me, a great motivator to make things. To me, that's the glue that keeps this enterprise ongoing. So, Sally, et cetera. Now, also, I want to thank David Giuliani, the chair of the Washington Business Alliance, because he was a sponsor, one of the sponsors of this event. I know there are many sponsors. He hosted a wonderful dinner for us, last night, for us to spend some time exchanging our views and plans and strategies, everything else. But anyway, thank you, David. You've supported this through your Washington Business Alliance, and so there's more to be done. We are an emergent phenomenon. Okay, so thanks a lot, and Bruce and Connie, the whole Wellspring gang, thanks again for having us. Yeah.
Thank you very much. What an outstanding way to end a day and a half of the conference. I do want to tell David that not everyone on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee is a denier. Congressman Derek Kilmer, who was with us here yesterday, is on that committee, and he represents this district, and I will tell you he is not a denier on climate change. So there is hope. There's always hope that things can change even in the U.S. Congress. I just want to thank our lead sponsors one more time, the Port of Tacoma, the Environmental Services Department at the City of Tacoma, and the Russell Family Foundation. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do this great event that you've all experienced with us over the last day and a half. I'm going to introduce Connie Bacon to do the closing remarks. But before I do, remember, you have this obligation as you head out the door today to spend money in Tacoma. There are great restaurants. There are shops in all the museums. The Murano has a nice shop with local crafts right there in the lobby. So get that holiday shopping done early. You can do it today in an hour and a half or so. There's also the tour of the Center for Urban Waters. If you're interested in the tour, which has been added to the agenda, as you know, meet out in the lobby, and Eagles and Joel and Kurt will organize folks on how to get down there. It's my distinct pleasure to reintroduce Connie Bacon, Port Commissioner Connie Bacon. If you saw your News Tribune this morning, which I know you all read before you came in or may have been reading during an earlier set of remarks I was making, you saw that the Seaport Alliance vote by the Port of Tacoma Commissioners, of which Connie is one, and the Port of Seattle Commissioners took place yesterday at Auburn City Hall, and it was a 10-0 vote, 5 commissioners from Tacoma, 5 commissioners from Seattle. They now enter a 5-month period of determining the details of how the interlocal agreement's actually going to act as it's implemented, or how it would be as they implement it. Without Connie Bacon, deals like this don't get done. Without Connie Bacon, there is no Wellspring either. There is no Port of Tacoma Chair in Environmental Studies at the University of Washington, Tacoma. Therefore, well, there would be a Joel Baker, but there would be no Joel Baker here. And so Connie's been a leader across the board in many ways in this community for many years, and it's been a pleasure to work with her on the Water Partners of Tacoma. So she's now going to take the podium and do closing remarks. Please welcome Connie Bacon.
Oh, God bless the short ones. We get to stand on high, right? Thank you. Thank you, everybody. You know, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not an engineer. I turn out to be a cheerleader. And I'm here right now to cheer for the people that have made this particular conference happen, and in particularly all of you who have spent your time and your money and your resources and your intelligent input so that we could have a conference like this. And I thank you very, very much for coming from everywhere. And don't go home. I support Bruce. You know, there's some good stuff around here. I also, though, want to give particular thanks to the people who really did the work for this conference, and that's Kurt Marks from the Urban Water Center. Kurt, where are you? There you are, Kurt. And Jim Parvey, where are you, Jim? Oh, he had to go to a meeting. That's good. See, he's working hard. But Jim was very, very key in establishing some of these panels. And, of course, to Eagles for the wonderful work that he did to actually make today happen. And I must say, actually make the Port of Tacoma and the Tacoma Water Partners be one of the 15 clusters that Ellen has on her, Sally has on her list. So I thank you all for that. And so, you know, being a cheerleader, and I was one, by the way, comes as no surprise. And I would like us to have a great big clap for all of these people. So thank you very much for that. I also did come away with some thoughts that I'd like to share, and I, you know, it's only about 15 pages. It won't take me long. No, seriously, just a couple things. I've been around this season to a couple of other conferences on water, most recent one, the U.S. Water Council in Kansas City. And what I took away from that one was the notion that has been brought up here in several different ways, which is that water and the issues around water and the support for water problems and solutions isn't there like it is for energy and so many other things. And I kind of tied that together today with the notion that where is that gorilla? Where is that big kahuna that goes to the legislatures, that goes to the federal government, that goes to the local governments, that goes to private industry, and lobbies for support for water solutions? And I didn't hear one. And so you know what? Maybe what could be that kahuna is this National Water Cluster Network. And so, Sally, you've got your work cut out for you, and each of us has our work cut out for us, because unless we work together, we're just not going to be able to get a big job like that done, unless there are a lot of voices. And I just do have to say a word about this alliance thing that happened between the Port of Tacoma and the Port of Seattle. You know, a few years ago when we had the economic downturn, everybody started to think of new ways of doing things. They had to, because they didn't have the jobs they used to have, and they didn't have the resources available that they used to have. And look at what's happened. It's really turned out to be an opportunity for new paradigms, for new agendas, for new solutions, for new networks, for new successes. And we are all part of that. And, the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma is really a good example because we have been competitive, not enemies. What is that? There's a better word for that. Yeah, they are rivals. That's better. Okay, we have been rivals for many, 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 many years. But because of the downturn, the industry that we work in has changed. And so we had to look at different ways of doing things that would keep the maritime business here in the Puget Sound Gateway, where we could both benefit. That is like saying, I'm going to fly to the moon tomorrow without anything around me. I have the wings to do it. It was almost impossible from the beginning. But the reason that it happened is because we both needed it to happen. And I think that is something that occurs all over our economy. Need is a great catalyst to make new things happen that you never thought could happen before. And what we need now is one another, our good ideas, and the ability to translate those ideas into economic success. And so I challenge us all, next time that we come together, and I'm looking forward to Wellspring 2015. Are you? Yes. Yes. I think that we need to talk more about how we can meet that challenge in a productive way where everybody wins, and it can be done. I'll tell you, this Port of Seattle, Port of Tacoma thing, they even put the word historic on it, but what I found out as being one of those 10 people is it didn't happen right away, but down the road during the discussions, people actually put away their personal loyalties, their personal biases, all of the things. I'm from Seattle, King County. I'm from Tacoma, Pierce County. I'm not going to do that because it's not good for us. All that went away after a while because we really, really realized that we could not increase the maritime business here in the Gateway unless we did it together. And so the bottom line is we intend to do the right thing. We've started out by doing the right thing, and we will continue to do the right thing. And I challenge us all to do the right thing so that everybody in the generations to come will have clean water to drink, to work with, to do whatever they are going to invent that we can't even think of now. So thank you so much for coming. There's a lot to do. Let's go home and do it. Thank you very much.